So no joke, he really can dance. He's pretty incredible. The guy's got some legit moves, so I love Coach. So it was just a beautiful day in September. September wasn't it? It was in May, actually. My brain was going, I'm thinking something else. It was a beautiful day in May. I was at home. And kind of a warm day. I was out cutting the grass. Everything was good. And we lived in a different house at that point in time. And I was out just running the lawnmower. Kids are all messing around. And just one of those gorgeous days back home in Missouri. Probably, 75, 80 degrees. I don't really remember. But it was just a pretty day. Just a pretty day in May. May 22nd to be exact. And you could tell they told us that weather was going to come in later on that night. Didn't think a whole lot about it. And, you could kind of see off the distance the clouds were rolling in. I lived probably about 15 miles north of town. And the weather really wasn't like nearish yet. It was still sunshine. But you could hear you're getting stories, and the clouds were starting to come in toward our home. Wasn't really thinking a whole lot about it. Next thing you know, my wife said, hey, you know what, we probably need to go inside. In town, they're reporting that it's getting pretty severe. They're recording both, tornado warnings, tornado watches all around us. And I was like, oh, okay. So we went in the house and, turn on the TV, and I'm sitting there watching it. We get this crawl space we can go down into. So finally, the wind started picking up, started getting a little more severe. And so we just dropped down into our crawl space and had a little radio that we were listening to. And, family all clustered together there. It's kind of damp and musty down there. And started listening to the radio, and then all of a sudden the news, this broken news, you could hear this report that a guy was driving around the town that I work in Joplin, and started to say something about, that this store was now gone, and couldn't see Home Depot anymore, and that Walmart was now gone, and that Walgreens was gone, and Pizza Hut was gone, and just started listing off. And then later on, another report came back and said actually we have an update, the hospital is now gone. You got to keep in mind, this is 5 o'clock on a beautiful spring day. Just turned a storm that day. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody is on their way earlier to go into Lowe's or Home Depot, go to Walmart, pick up things. You could think in your town what it would be like at 5 o'clock on a Sunday, beautiful Sunday evening. Families going in town to grab dinner at Pizza Hut or Sonic. Everybody's out and about. And what we realized on May 22nd, 2011 is one of the larger tornadoes to ever sweep through the United States, swept through this town that we lived in. Still remember getting a phone call at my house from my neighbor. He was out of town. And he called the house. And he got a hold of his wife, and he called us as well. And he said, hey, Jayson, I can't get a hold of my mom. Would you mind running in town and seeing what's going on? I was like, yeah. He told me where she lived. And so I knew it was close to that Walmart. So I jumped in my truck, four-wheel drive, just going in. You got power lines down, all kinds of stuff. And I'm bumping up over stuff, taking back roads, doing anything I can. I finally show up to this apartment complex, and it's just obliterated. I look back behind me where Walmart once stood, and it's just gone. There's hardly anything standing. There's hardly anything there. And I'm looking at this thing at that moment. I realize there is an absolute tragedy. I get out of my truck, and I start trying to wander around, and there's a vehicle up inside the building. Just people kind of wandering around and shell-shocked, not knowing what's happening. Just rain still kind of falling, and everything's kind of wet, and these apartment buildings are absolutely destroyed. Remember, I didn't know what to do. There's no lights anywhere. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to help or where to even start. And it's so much damage and destruction that the fire department, there's not enough fire department, police officers, or ambulances to respond to the devastation. I remember I went back home that night after I couldn't find her. I looked everywhere, couldn't find her. Walking through this rubble, trying to figure out which apartment complex might have been hers. There's no numbers left on them, and yelling her name, couldn't find her. So I got my truck and I went home. I remember a day went by. And I remember wondering, man, should I go in town? What do? Everything in the news is saying, we need you to stay put, don't come in town. And we sat there, we watched the news, and man, it just was nothing but devastation. And I wonder, man, do I risk it? Do I go in town or not? Day after day went by. We're sitting there trying to figure out exactly how do we respond to this crisis? Do we just watch it unfold before our very eyes, or do we jump in our vehicles and run in town? And finally, I get an opportunity to actually go in and help. And a few days later, I went in town, but my job was a little bit unique in that I was helping out with cadaver searches. We were still doing a little bit of search and rescue, but they were calling in different people to come in and help. And I remember loading up in this truck, driving over to this area where the hospital used to be. And I remember my first time I pulled up there, I just looked, and this hospital is just The shell is there, but all the windows are gone. There's nobody in it. It's 5 or 6 stories high, and it just looks like a horror movie. I mean, you look at this thing, and it's just, for all practical purposes, it's gone. All 5 floors. And you think about, like, my mind's reeling. I'm like, there were women that had given birth that day. There were people in there getting treatments and dialysis, or they were, getting diagnosed with cancer, or they were having a surgery, and just all the different things that happens in a hospital that's 5 stories high in a city of 40 or 50,000 people on any given weekend. All of that was going on in that hospital. I'm just looking at it, and I look over to where we're setting up to do these cadaver searches, and you can see there's just these little gurneys laid out where doctors have performed surgery in this parking lot in the rain. There's gauze over here with blood on it, and there's beds with blood on them, and you can tell, like, just the triage of what took place in that space. And I'll never forget, man, just going out and doing those searches, trying to find either someone alive or trying to find people that were dead. We came back that night, and not even that night, but came back later on that day, and we sat down. I've been out several hours looking, and it was raining, getting pretty nasty, and it kind of this perfect thing arranged. We were about 60 of us all converged at the same time. We'd all finished our grids that we were searching, our areas, the blocks that we were looking through, the rubble we were digging through. And we jumped back in these pickup trucks, and they drove us back to this hospital parking lot. We all got out, and they had cold cut sandwiches that a local church had made. And so we were just sitting there, just freezing cold, eating these cold cut sandwiches, just kind of all looking and sharing about the devastation we had seen. I'll never forget, it was an old man. He looked like Gimli from Lord of the Rings. About that big, looked like like a dwarf. Stocky guy, big old long beard, not hipster beard, just dwarf big, like Gimli. And he's just sitting there, and he's leaning up against this thing, and it was a sacred moment. I wish I could actually tell you what he said, because, man, if an expletive can ever be holy, that day it was. We're all sitting there underneath this wide open sky with rain kind of sprinkling down on us, eating cold cut sandwiches, and this retired firefighter that looks like Gimli just sitting over there next to this bus, leaning over there, and he makes this comment. You ever had that moment where you're kind of talking to people and there's a lull in the conversation, and for a little bit nobody talks? We had that. He just leaned up against there, and I remember I was just kind of sitting there watching, and the lull of the conversation hit, and he makes this statement. He says, man, if it wasn't for and he dropped this expletive that I'm just not going to do for shock value. He says, if it wasn't for the church, this town would be in deep trouble. He says, man, and he said it again, an expletive for the word church. The church is flat getting this done in this town. And everybody, all 50, 60 people, all just turn and look at this guy. And he keeps saying expletives in front of the word church, which I'm just not really all that used to be honest. Kind of like, boo, boy, like a lightning bolt, it was going to come down. But it wasn't. It was holy. He goes, I'm telling you, man. Then he started listing off just different churches in town that were just doing an absolutely amazing job. And the ground turned holy and sacred in that moment. Because this man saw the impact of the church. Because a group of believers were willing to risk it. Because when a town was devastated and they didn't know where to turn, believers opened their homes, believers opened their wallets, believers got out their chainsaws, believers got out their rakes, believers impacted that city so fast and with such reckless abandon, they risked everything to love. That an old firefighter from Kansas City, Missouri did not know what even to say other than to say that the something church was getting it done. I love that. Sometimes, though, I get frustrated with my own heart. See, sometimes I know I should risk it, and I don't. See, we spent the last day having this long conversation about rebellion. And we think the voice of the enemy is just all about condemning. But sometimes I think he really draws a lot of power from numbing us. And sometimes I think it's not just about leading us to be rebels, to be people who are rebellious in our own heart. Sometimes I think he's got a whole nother tactic that we don't readily admit, and that's that he gets us to show restraint when we should show love. think sometimes the biggest issue we've got as believers is that we no longer risk it. We're content to play it safe. We're content to play it cool. We get the prompt to talk to someone else. You know that moment when you feel this move of the Holy Spirit in you that's telling you to check on somebody, that's telling you to ask you how they're doing, and then you get this whole idea of like, man, I don't know. They don't want to hear from me. I might be intruding. Or you hear someone's going through a really difficult time, and maybe things are really hitting hard in their family, hitting hard in their life, and you're like, maybe I should talk to them, man. And then all of a sudden you get with your friends, you're like, yeah, but I don't really know what to say. And we spend all of our time talking to one another about the fact that we don't know what to say, that our silence is deafening. Yet we'll talk all day about our silence. Unwilling, unable to risk it. We see that someone's got a need. Somebody needs us to intervene in that moment. And we just think, oh man, somebody else has got it. I mean, I don't want to intrude or anything like that. And the truth of the matter is, we think somebody else has got it, and nobody's got it. I faced this in my life once. I've never told this story publicly. My wife, who is doing just fine, she always gets mad when I don't, not mad, my wife doesn't get angry, but irritated. When I tell this story, and I don't preface with the fact that she's just fine. Everybody hear that part first? She's fine. Several years ago, she got a diagnosis with cancer. We didn't know what the results were going to be. The bedside manner of the doctor kind of led us to believe that this is either going to be just fine or she won't make it 6 months. Well, that was several years ago. She's doing just fine. But at the time, we didn't know it. I remember when he gives me this news, and I wonder, man, like, what do we do now? Like, I remember them talking to me and trying to explain to me what radiation was going to do and how she was going to be sequestered off by herself. And at that point, I've got like a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And I know single parents do it all day long. I grew up in a single parent home. Like, I understand it, but I've kind of lost my ability. And I'm trying to figure out, like, how in the world am I going to manage all this? What am I going to do? And I'm scared to death about if my wife is going to make it. I'm waiting on Mayo Clinic to get back to us to tell us what kind of cancer she's got. And I'm freaking out on all of this. And two guys that I thought would say they were my best friends. They thought everybody else had it. Several years later, I took them out for breakfast, one at a time, and I just had to look at them. I was like, where were you? You didn't even call me. You didn't even show up. Where were you, man? You said you were my best friend. Where were you? The truth of the matter is, as harsh as I want to be on them, I do the same thing. I make the same mistakes. See, we get deluded, guys. We get this idea that Satan's number one tactic is somehow to keep us, involved in sin. We think that, man, if we can just avoid sin, everything's okay. And we live these lives just trying to do everything we can to avoid sinning, to avoid doing something wrong, that we miss this whole other calling in our life, and that's to do right. Paul talks about it in Romans 7. He says, man, it's the bad things that I don't want to do. Man, that's what I do. But he goes on to say, he says, man, it's also the good things that I know I should do. Man, I don't do those things. And a lot of times I think in our life, we're so preoccupied with not sinning that we miss something even more important or as important, and that's doing the good things that God has called us to do as believers. If you think the one calling you've got in your life is just to not sin, then you have a gravely misunderstood view of who Jesus is and who he wants you to be. Your spiritual life is not just about avoiding sin. It's about leaning into good. When God put Adam and Eve in that garden, their calling was not just to avoid fruit, it was to work and to care, to tend and to be there. And so many times what I find among us as believers, it is not that Satan's just dragging me down this path that's just of rampant sin. I mean, it's not like I'm dealing drugs to like little kids in the playground or like that. It's not like I've got this crazy amount of sin living in me. My bigger issue is not all the sin wrapped up in me. My bigger issue is failing to do the good things that God wants me to do. Man, a couple quick stories. We got to get moving to our text. You find this. Early church was known for this, man. They killed it. The early church, they got it. Back in like 8150 or something like this disease swept through Rome, was killing 2,000 people a day. 2,000 people a day were dying. They're pretty sure it's probably smallpox. People dying left and right, and what everyone did is they all fled the city. They all left, like, we don't want to catch this disease. We're gone. We're out. Let's bail. But the Christians did something interesting. The Christians stayed. The Christians didn't leave the city. They didn't bail. They didn't go run for cover. No, they stayed right there in that city, and they nursed people back to health. They were there. They treated their wounds. They loved them. And this guy named Dawson, or Tertullian, says this. He makes this comment. He says, it's our care of the helpless and our practice of loving kindness that brands us in the eyes of our many opponents. Only look, they say, look how they love one another. Because if you were a believer, you had someone to look after you. Because believers have one another's backs. And it wasn't just that. It was all the people who bailed on family, all the pagans, all the non-believers. When they bailed on family and left, the Christians stayed. And they didn't just look after their own. They looked after non-believers as well. It happened again, short time later. Same city, same region, except this time it's measles, and it sweeps from Ethiopia all the way to Scotland. And they'd find armies literally dead on the battlefield who had no battle scars on them. They just died of disease. This disease is so rampant that's spreading everywhere. Dawson, he says this. He says, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. He says, Christians took charge of the sick, attending to their every need, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors. They transferred death to themselves and died in their stead, so that death in this form sees every way the equal of martyrdom. See, we come from a bloodline. We come from a bloodline of people who don't run when the going gets tough. We come from a bloodline of people who show up when it's difficult, who make themselves available in the midst of opposition. But I feel like our enemy has really found a pretty smart tactic. He's got you so focused on not sinning that you're not even considering responding to needs. And we've grown numb. I believe one of his tactics in your life is to get you so focused on the fruit that you fail to remember you were built to work. So focused on the forbidden, the things that you can't do, that you've forgotten what you were built to do. And inaction is not in your DNA. From the moment God crafted you, from the moment he built you, from the moment he hardwired man, we were hardwired to work and to care. Yet sometimes I feel like as a church and as individuals, we become much more known for our inactivity than we have our impact. I think it's why Jesus, he said something here in Matthew 25, and when you can realize that he knew what was coming, and he knew that people would be dying of measles and smallpox. He knew that tornadoes would sweep through. He needed his bride to respond. He needed you to respond. And that's why these words meant something different to the local church back then than maybe they do to us now. He says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. You clothed me, you looked after me, you came. And whatever you did for them, you did for me. I believe one of the things we could learn and go back to is understanding the importance of how we respond to felt needs. We've gotten so lazy when it comes to responding. It's almost like we've become a club and we've got our matching shirts, our matching songs, all of our little, quirky things that we like to do that make us, who we are. But in the early church, that's not what they were known for. In the early church, they were known for their love. I love the way that this gets unpacked in the text. As we dive into it, oh, I didn't catch that one. Let's move on. Tonight's text says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our life for our friends, for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not live with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. I like the fact that he starts off by saying Jesus Christ. This is John writing. He and Jesus are like best buds, man. They hung out all the time. They're close. They're good friends. But even John wants us to realize that he's talking about Jesus Christ. Now, some of you may not realize, you think that Christ is like his last name. Like if the teacher gave him a piece of paper and said, write your name at the top, that he would sign Jesus Christ. No, Christ is not his last name. Christ is his title. Christ is a title for him. It means he is the anointed one. He is the governor, the owner, the builder, the maker of all creation. Everything flows through him and by him. He is Jesus who brings the mountains up. He is Jesus who causes oxygen to flow. He is Jesus who lets the sun rise and the sun set. He is Jesus who causes the tides to form. He is Jesus who put the animals on this earth and the fish in the ocean. He is Jesus, the Christ, the anointed one. And John wants you to realize when he says this is that name's a big old deal. But it's not just a name. It's what he does next. When John said he laid down his life. So quickly we want to jump to the cross, and that is exactly what John is pointing to. This whole concept of laying down his life, I mean, John talks about it throughout the book of John. When he talks about the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep in John 10. But it's more than that. I don't want to belittle the cross by any means. The cross and the resurrection are the culmination of the whole story. I think the point that I want to make to you is that if I want to make a point that Jesus laid down his life and you ought to lay down yours, you're quickly going to go, what am I supposed to do, Jayson, down a cross? Not really. I think we can find things about Jesus that intercept and come before all of that. Jesus laid down his life long before he ever got on the cross. He laid down his life that day that he showed up on the shore about 2 o'clock in the morning and a naked demoniac came running at him. He laid down his safety. He laid down his health when he reached out and he touched a woman and called her daughter that no one else would touch. He laid down, his privilege when he took off a crown in heaven and put on a crown of thorns, when he was willing to give up everything and be made into a baby and be placed in a manger. He was willing to give up his prestige. He laid down his reputation because he wasn't afraid of prostitutes and political degenerates. And he laid down his own immortality for a cross. I think we ought to risk it too. I think if the Christ, the creator of the blood that flows through your veins, the creator of the oxygen that you've been breathing, if he's willing to risk it, and you got to realize, man, when he sends Jesus to this earth, we all know the end of the story. We think it's just this foregone conclusion. That's how it's all going to play out. But no. God takes an immense risk in that moment. Why do you think Satan shows up and tempts him and tries to talk him out of it? Why do you think at the garden, Jesus takes a knee, gets down and says, God, if there be any other way, those crowns they put on those thorns, those were real and that pain was real. It wasn't like somehow, his body, his nerve endings were somehow, desensitized so the thorns and the nails didn't feel quite as bad. No, it was a risk for him in what he did. And he laid it all down for you and he laid it all down for me. And we ought to do the same. I mean, it's not like you're taking another person's life for crying out loud. I mean, it's not like you're killing people. I mean, we're pretty good, aren't we? It's like we need to push it that far, Jayson. You're saying I got to lay down my whole life? I'm not like what John says just a few verses earlier in 1 John chapter 3, verse 12, where he talks about this guy Cain. He says, don't be like Cain who killed his brother. That phrase that John uses for kill is interesting. It means to cut someone's throat. It's kind of a morbid, gross thing to think about right now. But sometimes I think we live in a cutthroat culture more than we live in a culture that blesses and helps. Sometimes I think we're more known for our sarcasm than we are known for building other people up. Sometimes I think we're known for being a smart aleck and for hurting people's hearts and making fun of them way more than we're ever known for the way that we encourage and lift them up. When we neglect the physical needs of people, when we assassinate their character, when we neglect them emotionally. And we've got people in this room that all week you've wanted to connect, but even in this space somehow this hierarchy gets developed in a youth group of the have and the have-nots, the cool and the not so cool. And do you realize there's no place for that in the kingdom of heaven? If he laid down his privilege, his popularity, if he laid down his comfort, then surely you can do the same. We ought to lay down our lives as well. And honestly, lay down those lives daily. Yesterday, we talked all about obedience, and The importance of that. That's all yesterday's theme. I think what you find today is that if you truly want to live out a life of obedience, you'll find that in a life of sacrifice. How much are you sacrificing for the needs of people around you? He goes into this other statement. I want you to read it with me. You can look at it. He says, my command for you this is, love one another as I've loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that he would lay down his life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. But then he goes on into verse John 3, and he says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. That's an interesting phrase. I want to talk about what that means. And when it comes to risk it, when it comes to truly laying down your life, I want to unpack this phrase because it really is a little bit unique. When John says brothers and sisters, he's not talking about like the greater galaxy of humanity. Like some of you are like, I love everyone in the whole wide world. You know, they're all my friends, and I just love everybody. That's not what John means right now. And I'm not saying that's wrong. What I'm saying is that's not what John means. What John's specifically talking about are the people you're sitting with next to you, right next to you, just down the road from you, that are sitting with you, that you go to church with every Sunday. When he says brothers and sisters, he's talking about the family you do life with, the church you attend, the neighborhood you live in. He's talking about the network of people that you do life with. You know these people. Sometimes I think we are so about loving the whole world and loving everybody that we just really end up loving nobody. We love everybody, and we don't really end up loving anybody. When's the last time you risked it? I mean, truly risked it to put your life on the line for another person? The point that you would lay down your titles, you would lay down any sense of prestige, you would lay down any sense of comfort, you would lay down your own wealth, you would lay down your material possessions, you would lay down your time, you would give up of who you are in order to bless someone else. Or do we do some of the other things that John talks about? We just look past them. And in fact, he goes from brothers and sisters to singular, brother or sister. Don't miss that either. But what John's saying about is that sometimes you can't just love the broad swath of humanity. You've got to love the person sitting in front of you. Who is it? Who is it sitting in your youth group? Who is it sitting in your church? Who is it sitting in your community that you know you need to love? And you're not doing it. Love will risk. Galatians says this, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. And we should. We should do good to all people. But Paul says, let us especially do good to those who belong to the family of believers. You ever read handheld, Levi? Go ahead and bring that up. You guys kill this one. Let's just switch real quick. You guys have got to realize the importance of you deeply caring for the family of believers. Here's the way it plays out in the early church. It kind of goes like this. All the pagans, all the people who don't trust Jesus, don't want to follow him, they look at this group of Christians and they don't know quite what to do with them. It blows their mind because of the way they love one another. And they keep looking at them and the way they come together, the way they encourage one another. In fact, it plays out in a couple of ways in the book of Acts. If you look here, it says all the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property, possessions, they gave to anyone who had need. And look at that last line. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Do you want your youth group to grow? Do you want your church to grow? Do you want the kingdom of God to be advanced? Then let non-believers see the way you treat one another. They can't come into your youth group and watch you digging at each other. They can't come into your youth group and watch you using words to stab one another, to tear one another down. They shouldn't come into your space and be filled with sarcasm. They should come into your space and be filled with hope. It should look different because they go to your church. And that's what it was in the early church. When smallpox came, when measles came, this was a group of people who had your back. This is the people who watched over you. Who's got your back? If the first thing you say is not your church, you might need to ask some questions. This should be the first people. There was a death in your family, they're there. The first people that when you lose a job, they're sitting there, they're praying for you. They're saying, not only praying, I'm going to help you find a job. They're the first people that when your house burns down, they show up. They're the first people they find out you've got cancer, they're bringing food to your house. This is what this community needs to be. And then the whole world sees that and they're blown away and they think, how do I get that? We have to look different than the world. We can't just look like some random club or random get-together of people. We have to look different, and they will know we are his disciples by our love. by our action. It says something similar in Acts chapter 4, halfway down. There were no needy persons among them. There's a caution that we're given in all of this. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in them? Now listen to that. That word pity is interesting. It means like to shut a door. Bam, lock it. If you've ever found yourself in a place that you've shut your heart off to the needs of somebody else in your church, you shut your heart off and it's like you just don't really even, you didn't even use the words, maybe the most offensive words, I don't care. I mean, it's bad when we treat a non-believer poorly. It's wrong when we treat a non-believer in a way that's just not proper. But it's monstrous when we treat a fellow believer in a way that's not holy. It's monstrous when we treat a fellow Christian in a way that's not right. We can't allow our heart to ever be closed off to our brothers and sisters in this room. Yes, we do need to care for the people who don't know Jesus. Yes, I'm not denying that. But I'm saying if we'll do this right and we'll love one another well, and I'm not talking about creating some sort of holy clique where people just watch us and they wish they could be a part. No, I'm saying we create a culture that we look at people and say, come on in, come join us. And when trouble comes your way, we've got your back. When difficulties come your way, we will be here. When everything else leaves, when everything else abandons, the one constant you know is you can trust this church to always be here and never fail you. James says, what good is my brothers and sisters if someone claims to have faith that has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister without clothes or daily food, if one of you says, well, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing for their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. How's your faith? It's kind of like this. Any Fortnite fans in here? Got some Fortnite fans? A few of you? Okay. My son thinks he's a Fortnite legend. You do, don't you? How many wins you have?
I got 10.
That's ridiculous. 170. You need to do better things with your time. You're cheering that? Don't cheer that. I will say, he also went to state in golf, so that's not all he does. But I go down and I watch Levi play Fortnite sometimes, and if you don't care, welcome to the club. But I go watch him sometimes, and I'll laugh while he's playing. He'll go to golf practice, and I need to say, straight A student, graduated, cum something or other law, whatever it was, I don't know, top of his class. Yeah, he's a good kid. He works hard, so he's not like all Fortnite, because he's gonna be mad if I make it sound like he's addicted or something like that. Never mind, we're not gonna go there. But I've watched this game play out, and you can imagine what it's like. Like sometimes they do that thing called squads, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, squads. And if you don't know, it's okay. I'm just talking about Fortnite family right now. So when they're playing squads, and you got like those 3 other guys you're playing with, and you like drop into that area, and then all of a sudden, you peek, and you get hit, and then all of a sudden, your buddy has got, he's got mets, and he doesn't help you out. Dude, you got mats, and you're not helping. And they're like doing a little dance all around you, and you're sitting there crawling on the ground like, bro, what's up? Come on. You got mats, and you're not here. And he's got the stupid jug. He's got a med kit. He's got bandages, and he's giving you nothing? Or man, make it even worse. You need ammo, and he won't share it. And he's probably a noob, man. It's not like he even knows what to do with it. You get it, man. So what's the difference? What's the difference when you find a fellow brother or sister in your own community, a fellow Christian, and you hoard your wealth, you hoard your possessions, you aspire for more and more and more? How do you think the God of the universe looks at us when all we do is try to amass more and more and more for ourselves, and we've got a brother or sister who's in deep need right now? And we continue to dance on our little dance, play our little games, act our little way, knowing that this person desperately needs help. I think that's what James is getting at. I think that's what John is getting at. If you live a life Would you hoard your wealth, hoard your possessions, hoard your stuff for yourself? The question you would ask is, dude, how can the love of God be in you? How can the love of God even be in you? I think we have to be willing to risk and to love at all cost. I love what John Wesley says. He says, not how much of my money I will give to God, but how much of God's money I will keep for myself. We're commanded in 1 Timothy to be people who are willing to share. And I think one of the tactics that the enemy is doing is he's got you so busy, so focused over here thinking of all the things that you don't do, that this whole attitude of neglect, this whole attitude over here of the good you could be doing. That's what James says, man. If you know the good you ought to be doing and you don't do it, it's sin. This world is not just about all the things you don't do. As believers, we've got to become passionate again and compassionate again about the things we will do. Jesus says, a new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you're my disciples by how many people attend your youth group. By this, everyone will know you're my disciples by all the nice things you say to people. By this, all men will know you're my disciples by how cool your youth room looks or how, hipster your youth pastor is. And I've seen the youth pastors this week. If that's a condition, you're out of luck. Just kidding. I'm joking. No, none of that's true. They won't know your disciples because you take the coolest trips. They won't know your disciples because you get the latest technology. They won't know you're his disciples because you get the nicest building in town. No, how do they know you're disciples? By the way you love one another. And that love is built in action, not in words. John cautions us against this. And he makes this statement. Dear children, let us not love with words or speech. Do you hear that? Stop saying, oh man, I love you, if you can't back it up with your actions. Maybe the best thing you can do over the next 60 days is shut up and show up. Maybe the best thing you can do with your life is stop running your mouth about how much you love people and actually do something. I don't want to chastise you for cheering, but are you going to do anything? Your words are empty when your feet are not there. Your words are empty when your feet are not there. And on that day, it hurt when my buddies weren't there. But I'm no different. I mean, I can pick at them in a sermon illustration, but if they were here, I'd say, I'm the same way. I called you out that day. I'd do the same thing. I know the night I broke my neck, and I'm sitting in a hospital bed. For everybody out there going, well, man, I don't know what to do. I don't know what we should do. What we should do. You know what two guys did do? Mark Christian, my friend, and Mike Smith, coach, my friend, they showed up in the ER at the foot of my bed, and they were there. You know what that meant to me? You know what my friends all did? When I couldn't move and I heat my house of wood, you know what my friends did? My friends at work all showed up at my house, and they split wood, and they stacked it all so we could make it through the winter. They didn't just talk. They didn't just say, oh, man, that's too bad. And if you think that you can somehow reach out to people through Facebook and say, I'll pray for you, or give some little tweet, a little text that's got the praying hands, then you don't understand what it means to give the love of God. You gotta shut up and show up, man. And it doesn't mean anything until your feet are there. And we have forgotten how to love people properly. We forgot as a church how to love well. We've got an enemy that's got us so focused on what we don't do that we forgot to focus on what we're supposed to do. I know I played out in my life, man. That's how I came to Jesus. I came from a broken family, not abusive, but broken. Brother smoking pot all the time, keggers every other weekend, and my job as my son's age, you saw him on stage, my job at his age was mixing drink and pouring Budweiser. That's what I did. Waking up on Saturday mornings, people half clothed in my house, and it wasn't abusive. I'm not saying my parents mistreated me, but it was like It was messed up. And this kid invited me over to spend the night. He just invited me over. And I went in that house, and I spent the night, and I didn't know what to do, and they all met together the first time, and they held hands. We sat down to eat, and they all held hands. I'm like, how are we going to eat? This is weird. I've never seen a prayer before. I don't know what that was. Like, this is weird. And they started talking to somebody I couldn't see, and then they took me, like, they asked me if I wanted to spend the night another night. I was like, yeah, I'll stay another night. That's cool. We play wiffle ball and eat chocolate chip cookies. I like this place. So I went to this thing called church. I've never been to church before. I didn't know what church was. I know we ate really bad snacks, and the Kool-Aid was really weak. I know that. My mom made way better Kool-Aid than the church. But I went, and then I sat on this hard pew, and his dad talked way too long, wouldn't shut up. I was like, come on, let's go play wiffle ball. I didn't know what a preacher was. But I know that my felt need was for family. My mom had been through a couple different divorces. At that point, the guy she's living with, she's not even married to. And he showed up again, man. It's not just that time. I remember after that, I started going to church, and my dad wasn't real keen on the church I was going to. He didn't like it. So he said, well, we're going to go try at a different church, he said. We're not going to that one. So we all got in the vehicle one morning. We drove to the church building. It was like, man, we're not dressed for this. So we just rolled out. Next Sunday, we get dressed. We show up for church. Show up the next Sunday for church. He's like, we're a few minutes late. Let's go. So we left. Show up the third Sunday for church. We're the people show up in the parking lot and we don't even get out of the car because we don't feel like we belong in this place, man. We are the kids your parents tell you can't hang out with. We went in. They're really nice. They were kind to us. They talked to us. They invited us to have ice cream that night. We did. Shortly after that, like I told you, I'm a country boy. Back then, we didn't do it the way you guys do now. It's a little old school. I know my generation ruined the environment, but we used to have to burn our trash because we didn't have trash pickup. Big old 55-gallon barrel. We'd take our trash out there. We'd burn it. We lived so far out in the country, nobody was coming to pick it up. So we go out there and burn it. And I remember one day, my mom had evidently put an aerosol can, and I went out to burn the trash like my job was at about 10 years old. As it lit on fire, I went back inside to take a shower. My dad was still working. It was hot. We didn't have air conditioning, so I was like, I'm going to cool off. Next thing you know, my mom's screaming. She's like, Jayson, there's a fire! Jason, there's a fire! Get out of the shower, trying to put jeans on when I'm wet, which is always weird. I'm trying to get my clothes on, and run out there. And I look, and whole woods are catching on fire, man. Aerosol can had blown up in the fire. It had fallen on the ground, caught the leaves on fire, and they burned over underneath my brother's car he was restoring. It was a 55 Chevy hardtop, 2-door. It was catching on fire. The wheels were on fire. The tires were on fire. And I was like, grabbed the hose. I took off running, and boom, just ran out. And I'm squirting maybe from like here to the front of house with a hose, or if even that far. And I'm not even close, but I can still feel the heat. I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I ran back in. I'm like, Mom. Like, everything's on fire, and it's burning over towards the buildings where my dad keeps his tools, and we're not a wealthy family. My dad loses his tools, he's going to lose his livelihood. And it's not just the tools, it's going to get to the house if we can't get this thing stopped. Like, you got to call Dad. She jumps on the phone, and this is back before pagers and cell phones. I mean, I'm 10 years old at this time. We got a cell phone back then. And she calls this lady that lives just up the road. She met her at church. Her name was Vicky. He said, hey, Vicky, can you drive down the road? It's about a mile away from you. Dan's working on a house there. He's building a house. And she's like, can you tell him to get here quick? All the wood's on fire. Our house is going to burn down. We're going to lose all of our buildings. We're going to lose everything. And Vicky's like, oh, you bet, honey. I'll take care of it. But Vicky makes one other phone call before she gets in her car. She calls someone from the church. And Vicky drives over, and my dad's up on top of the roof, putting down sheets of plywood, trying to build this house, got a crew working there with him, and she tells him, Dan, everything's on fire. They need you back at your house. And he's just looking like, I can't leave my tools. He's looking at this crew that he's got to pay, and he's like, guys, help me load everything up. And we're throwing it all in the pickup, and he's just throwing in the tools as fast as he can. Didn't want his stuff to get stolen, and finally jumps in the truck, and he just hauls home as fast as he possibly can. My dad comes racing around the corner up that old gravel drive, in the middle of the sticks, comes racing around that corner. And as he pulls up, he can't hardly make it in because there's cars clogging the driveway. And he pulls up, and my mom is literally sitting there stirring lemonade with a smile on her face. And all of a sudden, he sees the people that he saw a few Sundays before, and they're all standing there, every one of them, just talking, all of them holding a rake, just looking. And it's all the people from the church who have shown up in our moment of need, who didn't just say, oh, that's a sad thing. Did you hear what happened in the McGrew's place? Their place caught on fire. Isn't that too bad? No, they risked it, baby. They were willing to leave. They're willing to abandon what they had. They didn't just tweet it. They didn't just Facebook it. They didn't just talk about it. They showed up. They showed up. And you know who's there? You were there. And you were there. And you were there. Because the church is who we are. And the gates of hell can't stand against us. And I watched my dad load every bottle of liquor in a wheelbarrow. And I went with him that day and watched him bust every bottle. And I watched him surrender his life to Jesus. Not because of a nice building or a cool youth program or a hip pastor. No, because you showed up. You showed up when our world was falling down. You showed up when my wife had cancer and you brought me food. You showed up at the foot of my bed when I broke my neck. And then you went out and you split wood for my family so we could make it through the winter. You showed up in the life of a little second-grade kid who had no concept of what a family was, who'd never seen a prayer in his life. You showed up and you gave him family. And you showed up at my house that day and you led my dad to Christ with a rake. We are the church. Don't become so preoccupied with not sinning that you miss the good we're called to do. Engage, church. Risk it. Risk it all with love. Risk it with everything you've got. Lay your life, lay your heart on the line, and may they know we are disciples because of our love. I want you to grab that coin you've got right now and pull it out. Just quietly, just grab it and hold it up. Just pull the coin out, just quietly, you don't need to talk. At some point tonight, I want you to write your name on one side of it. Doesn't matter when it is. Just at some point tonight, I want you to write your name on it. I don't know what your name is, but you just put it on one side with a Sharpie. Doesn't have to be now. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to shut up and show up. That's what I want. I want you to quit walking around this youth group saying, oh man, I love you, I love you. That doesn't mean jack until you literally show up. At somebody's grandma's funeral, you show up when they've got difficulties in their home. You show up when they need help. Your feet are there, not just your words. And so here's what I want you to do. I want you to write your name on one side. And then I want you to pick that one person in your small group that you know will hold you accountable and won't let you get away with it. You know who they are. Don't let the two buddies trade that probably will never do anything with it. I want you to trade some coins around in this room until you've got one with somebody else's name on it later. And I want you to do this for the next 30 days. I want you to risk it. Every morning I want you to wake up, I want you to flip that coin. And if it comes up with a side without a name, your job that day is do everything in your physical power to find a way to risk it that doesn't involve your words, that doesn't involve cheap talk, that doesn't involve you running your mouth. You find a way to risk it that involves you grabbing a rake, involves you meeting someone's needs physically, involves you actually getting your feet and showing up. That may mean you go to the hospital, or maybe you go to the nursing home and you visit somebody from your church that probably nobody's visited in the last 2 or 3 years, and you show up and you say, I know you don't know me, but we go to the same church, and I just wanted to show up today. I just want to tell you I love you. And I just want to take this moment, not just with my words, but with my actions to say, can we talk today? Tell me about yourself. Tell me where you come from. Tell me your story. I want you to show up. I want you to show up in the life of that single mom who needs someone to watch her kids. I want you to show up. I want you to show up in the life of that family that's at that work, and I want you to give them a Walmart gift card because you sold your Xbox or whatever else it is. I want you to shut up, and I want you to show up. And on the other times when you flip it, and it pulls up your buddy's name. You just give him a call and go, bro, you're in. Today's your day. And I will be praying for you all day that you risk it, and you have until 10 p.m. tonight to text me back to tell me what you did. May we be known by our love. And may that not be with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Thank you, church. Thanks for reaching a little second grade boy who never knew what it meant to have a dad. Thanks for reaching my dad with rakes. Thanks for reaching Joplin, Missouri, with chainsaws and sandwiches. Don't let them ever delude you. We are the most powerful force on the face of the planet when we love and we love well.